Welcome back to part two. Sorry, Patrick, in the face there.
Welcome me up.
Well, I'll do it this side. Welcome back to part two, guys. Skill Builder has released a second video going further into what he was perpetuating before, and we're obviously going to give a little bit of a reaction on that. I've seen one or two little snippets out of this. I think Pat, you've watched it, haven't you?
I've watched it.
And yeah, so it's another reaction video to follow up on the last one, and yeah, let's get going.
The first thing you can tell immediately is that his production levels now are just
Hello, I'm Ross
amazing.
Bisbee from the Skill Builder channel, back for another little rant. And
I feel like we need to have a bit of a run actually, because I think in the last video we were quite nice to him actually.
I'm always nice.
But actually, really, this is really damaging to both the industry and the planet, because this is what he's saying. Let's get this straight. What he's saying here is false. It's a lie. Heat pumps are not, on average, 3 times more expensive to run at all. Any self-respecting heat pump engineer, when they start a job, and it's also necessary as part of MCS, does a performance calculation before you do the install. That's where you work out your radiator sizes, you work out your flow temperatures, and you can predict and work out how much it's going to cost to run the system. And if it's going to cost more than a gas boiler, you present that to the customer and say, look, would you like to do this? It's going to cost you more, even though you're saving carbon. They might say no, so you leave that job aside. The fact it's taken his, I think by his own admission, it was 2 years before his customer realised it was 3 times more expensive to run than a gas boiler, means he didn't size his radiators, do a performance calculation or anything like that. And I'm sure, I don't really want to put this guy down too much, but that goes to show he is not a heat pump installer or has no idea about system design, because that's the first thing you do when you put in a heat pump, or before you put in a heat pump. You design a system, you work out what temperature it's going to flow at, and the general rule of thumb is that we always use, and it's well known within the industry, if you can't get down to 40 to 45 degree flow temperatures at your design outside temperature, which is -3, if you're above that, it's going to cost more than a boiler to run. If you're below that, it's going to cost less than a boiler to run. And that's kind of our cap, really, isn't it, before we start looking at other options.
I guess there's a thing that you've always said that I've really liked, is that at the moment there's a lot of boiler installers that are going to have to become heat pump installers, and they've got boilers to practice on, and they get a choice then between either specifying it correctly and getting a boiler that works to its optimum efficiency, or they can fit it like historically builders always have, where they oversize it, put in the biggest thing possible so the customer's always warm. That doesn't mean that it's going to be efficient though.
So what you're saying is he's done it the other way around. He's tried putting a heat pump in the way you would put a boiler in.
Yeah.
But you know, this goes to show that this guy really isn't credible, and I'm sorry to sort of come across that way, because we're not trying to be sensationalist like this. The heat pump conspiracy, which is actually the name of this video, the conspiracy is him. He's talking about stuff he doesn't know about, because every installer worth their salt and who wants to do right by their customer shows them the running costs before you start. If you're looking at getting a heat pump, you need to try and target, and this is done at the design phase, 40 to 45 degree temperature or below if you want comparable or cheaper running costs than a heat pump.
So I guess hopefully the reason that he's released another video so quickly after the first one is that he's addressing some of these. I watched this briefly, I was doing other things, I had my 3-year-old in the room at the time.
Good point.
But I think that he addresses some of the inaccuracies from the first one, but let's find out.
Okay, yeah, run over.
is again
Maybe.
on the subject of heat pumps. I don't normally do back-to-back rants on the same subject, but this seems to have really captured the imagination of our viewers, and we've had loads and loads of comments. I was doing a video on heat pumps.
That last video is like one of his, I was going back through his other videos, it's one of his best performing videos of all time. It obviously did hit a nerve with people. And I noticed there was a hell of a lot of likes on that video and a lot of comments of support. And I think the comments of support are from people who have had installers like him who have tried to put a heat pump in like they would a gas boiler, not from a heat pump installer. because those installations are out there. So it's had a lot of support, but it's obviously very emotive, but very important at this time.
So more specifically, the governments need to subsidise those with £11.8 billion of your money. And I wasn't really against heat pumps per se. All I was saying is, why should we have to put our taxpayers' money into heating somebody else's home? Okay, I know what the argument is. We've got to get away from fossil fuels. Of course we...
No, everyone benefits from low carbon. The reason it comes from the government is because the world benefits from low carbon. You're not just giving someone money so they've got a special trick inside their house. We're giving government money because our country's carbon outputs come down.
We're a whole country. It's not. We're made up of lots of individuals or lots of homes, but they form one.
The homeowner isn't breathing in less carbon dioxide. We all are. Yeah.
They're going to run out anyway, so at some point we're going to have to...
You're right though, he is trying to kind of steer his thing. He's not against heat pumps.
He's bringing himself back to the middle a little bit.
Yeah, at least he's saying he's not against heat pumps, but that other video's performed well, and it's just discredited heat pumps, saying they're 3 times more expensive to run, which is just untrue.
You can't say one video a load of stuff that's not true, and then in the second video say, well, actually it wasn't so much. Because you've still got the gravitas from the first one.
This might get half the reach. He's not undoing it.
To abandon them? Do we want to do what Greta Thunberg is suggesting and go cold turkey on fossil fuels, stop using them immediately, or do we want to phase them out in a sensible way?
Well, no one's saying to stop using fossil fuels immediately. Nobody is saying to stop using fossil fuels immediately.
We'd all die.
You can't do it. You might be able to do it in some homes, in some infrastructure. You can't do it in industry. You can't do it in big commercial properties.
No one is saying that. The world is trying to do it in a sensible way. That's the whole point. And putting in a heat pump isn't saying stop using all fossil fuels. They use fossil fuels at source, quite a lot of them, because we've obviously got to supply it with electricity, which has a carbon footprint, although it's on a steep decline. And actually, so if you rewind 5 to 10 years, actually heat pumps were comparable, if not worse, with carbon, and now today they use about between 1/3 or 1/4 of the carbon, or produce 1/3 to 1/4 of the carbon, and actually in 5-10 years time that'll be 1/6, and after that it's on a massive decline. So and as systems get more better performance, that will obviously improve even further.
Here's my take on what a sensible way is. You find technology that is so compelling, that is so efficient, that nobody would argue about giving up their gas boiler to adopt it.
Doesn't he think people are trying to do that?
Well, no, but we do have that as well. So we do have that. There's plenty of people that have properties that are capable of having it and do adopt it, and we've got lots of clients that are happy to go to a heat pump without considering the renewable heat incentive.
But what he's saying is that we should be looking for a thing that works in every situation and just solves the problem. Obviously, like, people are trying to do that. They become very rich if they would. But that doesn't mean we go like that, because it might not be physically within our mental capability as humans to create something like that. We don't know.
There's no product at the moment, is there?
All we can work with...
There's no boiler that works in every single situation.
Exactly, and all we can work with is what we've got. We can't go, don't do anything until we get the perfect solution. We cut carbon in the meantime, and then when we get to something that might get close, we've got less work to do, and it buys us more time before the inevitable.
Therefore, you do not need to subsidise it. If heat pumps are so marvellous that they save all this money, give you lovely warm houses and low fuel bills, then you don't need a government subsidy. You'll have the world bidding up.
Problems and technology and advancing technology all needs money. Fossil fuels have been subsidised for years, 200 years or something. Boilers have been subsidised through the Eco3 scheme. Boilers have been swap your boiler for a condensing boiler. How many millions or billions has been spent on replacing boilers? Sorry, but boilers have had this, and they produce carbon. Why on earth wouldn't... And also, is he still talking about the RHI, which is ending? This is what's been spent.
Yeah.
This isn't...
We're on the tail end of it.
This is just so incorrect.
a path to your door. If you're a heat pump manufacturer, you won't need the government's help to sell them. They'll sell themselves. Of course they will, if they're that good. If you
Too
look at the
simplistic
comments
of you.
below on
Too
the first
simplistic.
video, you'll see that a lot of people agree with me and say, do you know what? I fitted a heat pump. I got talked into having a heat pump. It was a disaster from day one. The salesman was very compelling. He promised me all
Let's see how many comments we get from other installers and people saying they're really happy with their installs. So if you are happy, comment below.
kinds of wonderful things, and none of them materialised, or very few of them materialised. I'm cold in the winter, my fuel bills have gone through the roof, the bloody thing is noisy, it's defrosting half the...
Again, you can't... He's focusing on the absolute worst. You can focus on the absolute worst of any industry. You could look at double glazing and say the worst double glazing that was fitted that was the worst, or the worst car that I had repaired didn't work very well.
Yeah.
Of course it's going to look bad.
Yeah. He has a bee in his bonnet, and it might even be to do with the fact that if I've put it in this way and it didn't work, that means no one could do it. No, you didn't do a system design or even a yield projection. The reason yours didn't work is because you didn't know what you were doing.
And then you put it in the woods.
And I have to run it 24/7, because don't forget, if you've got an air source heat pump, the only way you're going to heat your house using 40 degrees centigrade output, roughly what they give, is to...
They give up 40 degrees, so 40 degrees. If you're running at 40 degrees, which is what he's saying you should design it for, they're comparable, actually probably slightly cheaper than a gas boiler. So what he's saying already is contradicting itself.
The other thing is that it's not necessarily 24 hours a day, but it's a lot more efficient to run a gas boiler for longer periods of time. You promote condensing efficiency, and it's the same with heat pumps.
Very good.
When it gets up to a certain state of efficiency, keeping it at that efficiency and running it at lower temperatures, he's going to be better. He's just misunderstood the whole situation.
Totally. And importantly as well, though, this is where heating system design comes in, because even if you do size your emitters for 40 degree flow temperature or mean temperature, you can install your system, say with a buffer, which he promotes, in a way that you still need an even higher temperature at the heat source, which would make it less efficient. This is where you need a good quality installer who understands what they're doing to really install these.
It sounds like we're only saying that because we've got a solution for that, but it's really, really true. Once you've done a decent heat loss and once you understand how it implements, especially into retrofit, it's no longer guesswork. You can understand, you can look at the numbers, and you can make a structured approach. There's an elephant on the table. We teach this stuff and we do a course on this. This is our thing. That's why we know about it. And in fact, if you're looking for a heat pump installer or someone knows about this sort of stuff, we have a map where you can find people that we've taught in this. Have a look at our other videos. We go very much into detail in this. There's a specific one on controls that's recently been out. That goes to show the sort of level that we teach at. But yeah, so we do have a solution for this. But it's also why we know that this is so incorrect. And also, our arguments are based on physics, not anger and conjecture.
Keep that heating on 24/7. Now there's a problem for me, because my wife loves a cold house. She doesn't mind heating it.
You can have a cold house with a heat pump. It's very, very, very cheap.
We've got a bit of a juxtaposition there. If you want a cold house, you can have a cold house, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't run a heat pump for 24 hours a day.
Yeah, you just set your target room temperature lower.
Or turn your thermostat down. Everyone's got a room thermostat or a TRV on their radiators. In the part where she wants it to be cold, just turn it down.
Or if she likes a cold house, as he said, you turn your weather compensation curve down, and your heat pump cop goes, and it's even cheaper to run.
Up for a few hours of the day while she's sitting there watching television, but for the rest of the time, when she goes to bed at night, she likes to switch the heating off. Wow. She likes to open the windows. She likes the bedroom absolutely freezing. A lot of people aren't used to having a house that is maintained at the same temperature all the way around the clock. In other words, 18 degrees centigrade is too warm for a lot of people to sleep in. But heat pumps work.
Yeah, but most people like it at 20.
But more commonly you'd have a setback at night, so your setback could go down to 16 or so.
This is that common misconception that you have to run heat pumps all the time. Yes, you run them all at the same time, but like Patrick's saying, you run a setback at night time, so it continues running but at lower flow temperature, so the house cools down. You've got a nice sleep. Well, I like it cool when I sleep, but I think everyone does. That's a normal thing.
I think the NHS, the World Health Organisation, say that a baby's room, for instance, should be from 16 to 19 or something.
Yeah.
So the setback for humans could be for adults, could be exactly the same. Nighttime, 16 degrees.
And like you say, you could set your TRV in your bedroom even lower than that if you wanted to.
Or crack a window.
Yeah.
Work best when they're just putting out a constant heat, and that heat is going into your house. Now, I've already said that they work best with underfloor heating. If you can get underfloor heating hooked up to your heat pump, you're on a winner. If you can't, if you're using radiators, you've got to increase those radiators by an awful lot before you can start to get any sensible thermal comfort out of it.
Again, that's the same thing with gas boilers. If you can hook a gas boiler up to underfloor heating or much bigger radiators and lower the flow temperature so it's below 60 degrees, then it's going to condense all of the time, and that's going to be much more efficient. And that's been the same technology we've had for nearly 20 years.
The difference is that we're getting much more efficient and much lower carbon with heat pumps, obviously.
So one of the other questions we get asked is around the heating system and whether we can connect a heat pump directly onto an existing heating system. In most cases, this isn't the case. We can't just replace an oil boiler with a temperature of 70, 80 degrees with a heat pump that's only going to give you 45 to 50 degrees. So this would mean that typically you would have to upsize the radiators, or if you're putting in a new underfloor heating system, maybe put the spacings tighter together.
But what about the flow and return to those radiators? Because that may be working at its limit. You may have 3 radiators working off a 15mm supply pipe, for example. When you put larger radiators on there, then you need a bit more flow to them. That means you've got to replace.
Larger radiators don't need more flow. That's a misunderstanding of mass flow rate. So it's the amount of energy that dictates the flow rate, not the size of the radiator. Heat pumps do need faster flow though, because they work at a smaller temperature drop across them. It just further shows his lack of understanding of hydraulics.
Unless he means that it just needs a wider bore for the lower flow temperatures. I think he's saying there's a limit to the amount of energy.
The amount of energy, if you're running at delta T of 5, you could have a radiator 10 times bigger and the flow rate would be exactly the same, because it's the amount of energy that dictates the flow rate, hence the mass flow rate equation. I've got a video on that which I'll put here, and anyone at home can understand that, and you'll know more than what's this guy's name again?
Don't remember. Barry.
You'll know more than Baz.
Place the pipes. Now, if you go into a new build, a lot of new build is run with 10mm pipes behind the dot and dab plasterboard into the radiator. It's all run off a manifold somewhere buried under the floor upstairs. Paradoxically, putting heat pumps.
Actually, with new builds, microbore's actually doable with heat pumps, even though you do need a higher flow rate. You may need a buffer, or there's certain things that you have to put in place, but actually microbore can work, which is a kind of a misunderstanding, because again, people are looking for one rule for all situations, which is never ever the case.
Pumps into those buildings is problematic. All these things can be overcome by good design. But is good design part of the picture?
Okay.
Yes, they say. We've got a code of practice. The installers, all the approved installers,
which he didn't follow when he put his heat pumps in, because he didn't do a performance estimate.
So we're going to grab this lovely taxpayers' money. They're going to do a beautiful job, and it's all guaranteed, and the government's inspected them. Well, we've seen that before.
Well, no, we agree that
he's right there. There's a complete lack of checks.
This is why you have to go on the company's reputation. Perhaps if you're going to get a heat pump, go and speak to their previous customers, or obviously have a look at their reviews and stuff. If they're going around leaving systems like this guy put in, that are 3 times more expensive to run, then their Google reviews won't be very good, I assume.
Or haven't we? But don't take my word for it. This video is hosted on a channel called Ground Source Heat Pumps Association. That is ground source, not air source. So therein is a huge difference, because if you talk to me about ground source, I think ground source is a winner. The only
ground source is like 2 times more expensive. So if the problem is if the problem's cost, then you're kind of contradicting yourself here.
It also gets a lot more government grant.
Yeah,
like 3 times more government grant.
So yeah, this is a complete.
Very few people would fit ground source without the very generous RHI.
Yeah, it's very hypocritical.
The problem with ground source is, have you got the ground to put it in?
Well, with ground source you can have a borehole, so you'd only need like not a lot of room whatsoever. So most people, I would assume, yes. Actually, that's a very good solution to the terraced houses we were talking about.
The problem is you've got to get the borehole rig into it, so unless you can crane one over the top, it is a bit of a pickle. I've looked at a couple in London recently.
I suppose also the solution for those sorts of properties, sorry, slight tangent here, would be the communal heating system.
District of some kind, and then have a little plant room at the bottom of one of the gardens.
That would be infinitely more efficient and better.
If you're investing in a heat pump, you may also have this problem. You didn't get the RHI you were expecting, renewable heat incentive payments, or I didn't get the project payback I was expecting. And that's generally because either heat pump isn't working, it's too big, or it's too small, so it's not working as much as you thought it was going to, or the COP is very low, so you're again taking a lot of electricity, which is costing a fortune, back to cost again. But these are sort of things that can go wrong, and I and others will regularly hear from people who've got heat pumps and that haven't quite gone to plan.
So Laura's telling us that some people are very disappointed in their heat pumps because they fail to live up to the promises. They end up with poor heat, huge electricity bills. She says they get problems with heat pumps freezing the ground, and I know all about that. And she said they get problems with...
Well, I'm guessing he's frozen up a ground, which does not surprise me.
Well, one of the videos he just showed, one of the clips he just showed was slinkies, which we've always said slinkies are very difficult to install without the potential of freezing the ground.
Yeah. But this is right. You can put them in poorly, which is why it's a more tailored, careful approach. Like, you need a good installer, as we've been saying.
There's a lot more to go wrong, isn't there? You can't just put a box on the wall and connect the pipes to it, especially with ground source. You've got to consider all of the hydraulics inside the house and outside of the house, and the way to tie them together.
But again, that's not a reason to go, don't bother with heat pumps, they're too difficult. They're once you learn it, it's like any job. If you're an amateur, it's not going to be very good. You're going to end up with the results that this guy came up with, 3 times more expensive running costs for all of his customers. But if you know what you're doing, I'd say nearly all, in fact all of our jobs are cheaper to run than, because our flow temperatures are a max of about 40, aren't they? So
but there's a couple of people, people come to us occasionally saying that they know that their cost is not going to be comparable, it's going to be a little bit more, and they're okay with that. They'd like to make the sacrifice because of the carbon savings.
Yeah.
And as long as we're clear with them and they're happy with it, then that's fine.
Yeah, the general rule is that, I mean, it's quite easy to tell if you're going to be more expensive than a gas boiler. You have to do a little survey, a heat loss survey, and work out your radiator sort of how much you're going to have to upgrade them, and you can calculate that into your sort of payback, if you will.
Radiators not being big enough, not giving out as much heat as the householder would want, especially in the cold weather. And she says that sometimes the minimum flow rates aren't achieved. You need to keep those flow rates.
Because the design isn't there that Patrick just mentioned. If you get a butcher to do dentistry work, don't say dentistry is no good. Say get a dentist to do the dentistry. I don't know if I'm going to leave that bit in, but it makes a lot of sense. It's the same as asking a butcher to build a rocket and it not taking off. You don't go, rockets don't work. No, you need a rocket scientist to make the rocket work. This isn't anything to do with the heat pump and all to do with the installer.
So, and sometimes this
sorry, sound like a broken record.
Another thing that Laura says is that the system integration isn't always well thought out. The heat pump isn't talking to the heating system. That's because they haven't had an engineer in there to design the controls and install the proper controls. Because not only do you need the heat pump, and in my opinion the buffer tank, although some people would say that if you're using certain type of heat pump you do not need a buffer tank. I know while I say a buffer tank isn't essential, I think a buffer tank is very desirable.
No, it's always a tailored approach. I'd say they're non-desirable. You try and design out your buffer. You try and put enough mass in your pipework and your emitters that you don't need a buffer. The minute you have to put in a buffer, you have to be very careful with your flow rates, otherwise your temperature of the heat source has to jump up slightly. So a buffer is something you want to avoid, and that's just another clue that this guy does not know about hydronics or heating system design. Sorry, it's true. He might know. I know he knows about bathrooms and stuff. I've seen his shower tray videos, which look really good. Were you about to say something?
Only that you can forgive a lot of the installers at the moment. There is a misunderstanding. There's a lack of information. There's a lack of knowledge, but there's a lack of resources. It's not necessarily the industry's fault or the installer's fault that the industry hasn't been brought up to line, because their resources are completely lacking.
There is nowhere to go for information. Again, that's the whole reason for this channel. It was born out of frustration that this information just isn't out there anywhere. It's kind of spread out very thinly and it's not very good. So we've collated that information. Take a look for our other videos and tried to make it in as kind of an easier way to understand as possible in English. A lot of the information out there is written by kind of academics that kind of want to prove their status rather than inform a general plumber, a normal guy. And that's kind of where we hope to bridge.
So Laura also talks about maintenance difficulties with heat pumps, and we've got some comments from the original video where people have said this thing never worked from day one, it kept breaking down, I had engineers back. She said I got to know the engineers better than my own family. And what Laura Bishop is saying, she's a mechanical services engineer, so what she's saying is it is essential to spend a bit of money up front on getting a proper design, getting the right size heat pump for your property, and making sure that it's properly installed. Now, I absolutely applaud that. If Laura Bishop is saying that and she's a mechanical service engineer and she can put her name to it and they can give some kind of guarantees, then I'm absolutely up for that. But let's face
we I don't want to use the word guarantee, but if you use a heat geek, but importantly a heat geek that also has a background in heat pumps, you can pretty much guarantee that you're going to get a performance estimate done, first of all, which shows you what your running costs are going to be, but secondly, a very good install.
I think it's a bit worrying that that Laura there from the GSHPA said that don't expect your installer to design the system. That's a real shame, and that's a real fundamental flaw, because the installer should understand it. Otherwise, when they're fitting it, how are they going to know whether they're doing it right or not? They can follow a schematic maybe, but that's a big problem.
It's another one of these people. Everyone's fallen for it. If you're on the tools, you're a donut who just connects pipes together. No, they're the most important people in this process. They should be involved from the very beginning to the very end. Not one set of people sitting with wearing a tie doing calculations at one end and then the grunt at the other end who gets no respect for his craft.
That's not to say every installer is deserving of that, but there's got to be a new wave of installers that do understand this and want to work with the client to best maintain their efficiency for their home, reduce their carbon intensity, and keep the costs at a manageable amount.
when these people sell you a heat pump, they're not employing Laura Bishop in the main. They're just getting their salesman in going, yeah, we'll chuck one of those. This is the size heat.
This is a thing. This is why you want like a small business who isn't sending out salesmen, who sends out actual engineers to do the survey. That's kind of a key thing really to look at. When the guy comes out who's doing the selling, doesn't have dirty fingernails, or actually we have quite dirty fingernails, but if they're not installers or come from an installing background, then you've probably found one of these companies that he's talking about.
Ask them what their previous job was, because if they've worked in a different industry a couple of years ago,
specifically double glazing salesman
or a phone salesman or something, and that's a massive thing. There's a lot of companies that stack them high and sell them cheap, and there's a reason they're cheap to install.
Again though, that's not heat pumps, that's the person installing it or the company installing it,
and it's
not the product.
It's not just heat pumps, it's boilers, it's everything in every industry. If it looks too good to be true because it's cheap, there's a reason for that.
Yeah, the difference with the boilers being you can just lob them in and they work.
Heat pump we always put in for these properties. If you match the heat pump to the property, you've got a fighting chance. People will tell you that they are whisper quiet. And again, we get comments from people saying, my neighbour's put one of us in. It's a nightmare.
My maid installed one.
His eyes are actually bloodshot. It looks like he's going to have a heart attack. He's very passionate.
I'm on a new bill. From day one, he hated it. Noisy, poor heat transfer, and it grows ice like crazy in the winter. Plus, it runs continuously.
I moved once because of a neighbour's heat pump that sounded like a 3-cylinder diesel, so I could not sleep. Now where I live, another neighbour has installed a heat pump and it is worse. I live in Denmark and the very modern heat pumps are huge and stupidly noisy. If everyone has to upgrade to a heat pump, the noise on a winter's morning is going to be crazy.
That's not me inventing it. Look at this guy.
So this is a non-working heat pump. Like the blade isn't even rotating.
It's a broken heat pump in America or something, yeah.
And an old one, by the looks of it too.
3 o'clock in the morning, I can hear this humming, and you know what it's like? It doesn't have to be a loud noise. The environmental health people come round, they check it with the decibel reading, and they go, oh no, that's way below what we consider to be a nuisance noise level. If that is droning away in the background and you're trying to sleep, that guy's got the...
Again, if you've got an installer who is registered with MCS and then governed by REC or whomever else, and you're installing it to MCS standards, there are limits to the amount of decibels that you can have within a boundary of a neighbour's home. So all of those problems are literally not allowed. But if you buy a cheap Chinese or American unit and fit it yourself, you're not governed by the same thing. So finding a verified installer means that you just won't have these problems.
Exactly. If someone's not following the MCS process, which Roger, I think his name is, obviously didn't, because he didn't do a yield calculation, he ended up with running costs 3 times more expensive for all of his customers, then he is just going to put something noisy outside someone's window because he doesn't understand the important bit.
So we've got a couple of working models outside of our offices here, and they are absolutely whisper quiet. We've got a 3 kilowatt and a 6 kilowatt. We install units much bigger than that, all the way up to commercial sizes. And when they're new and for the foreseeable future they're being serviced by a decent engineer, they're very quiet.
I suppose the sensible thing to do is, rather than taking our word for it or his angry words for it, just go and see one and listen to it if you can hear it. A modern one would be, don't base it on an old rusty old thing, because they're much quieter than they
Or a
used to be.
swimming pool heat pump. Quite often swimming pool heat pumps are a lot noisier, they're a bit more agricultural. Some of them are very good, but some of them are a little bit noisier, they're a bit less refined.
Yeah.
Heat pump screwed up on the wall on some brackets, and that wall is the same wall as yours. In other words, you're living in a semi-detached house, so the brickwork is going all the way round and it's transferring through the wall ties into the wall, and you can be lying in bed and you can be hearing the droning from your next door neighbour's heat pump, even though it's on the other side of the house, because noise travels like that.
Yeah, brackets are not a great way to install. If you can avoid it, you shouldn't install it on a bracket. Even if you use anti-vibration dampers, you do get a little bit of resonance through the building, and it will be annoying.
All part of the consultation process at the beginning of the job, not after you've installed them.
Let's go back to the whole idea of subsidies. This is where the whole thing hinges as far as I'm concerned. Should we, you, me, all the other taxpayers, be subsidising other people's home heating? The guy that's written to us in the comments, he's saying, you're completely wrong about heat pumps. I've got an 18th century farmhouse in Northumbria. It sounds absolutely beautiful. He said, I've installed heat pumps. I've had a £12,000 grant from the government there.
So they can work in old properties. They just need more work. This guy obviously has some money behind him to make it work. But it's another admission. There are happy customers out there, but you just have to find the right installer.
I don't know why he's saying he's got a big problem with the subsidies. Subsidies are there to encourage things that governments have decided that are better for, in one way or another, the general population. But in the same way, we pay our taxes to subsidise the National Health Service, and I probably pay more than I get out of it. I'm sure lots and lots of people do, but we don't complain that we're helping fix other people's ailments with our higher taxes. There's a reason that we've got the NHS and not a privatised system like a lot of other countries.
Our grandchildren are going to be benefiting from lower carbon, so we do get a result from this. The reason we're paying out again isn't so someone else has a heat pump, it's so our grandchildren have a less of a battle to fight when they're put into this world.
They're going to pay the maintenance charges for the next 7 years, and I am very happy with it. Well, you would be, wouldn't you? I am very happy for you. What you had is an oil boiler before that because you're off the national gas grid. You did the right thing. You changed over to a heat pump, and you got £12,000 from the government just to help you do it. What I'm saying is £11.8 billion, right? All through the pandemic, we went out, I went out, a lot of other people went out. On a Thursday night, we stood there on our doorsteps and we applauded the NHS. We applauded all those lovely people who were working, putting their lives at risk, working round the clock to take care of people that were suffering from COVID. And while we were doing that, I was thinking, do you know what? It's nice to have a clap. The government's telling us they can't afford a pay rise. They're saying to give the nurses and all the rest of the NHS workers a pay rise is going to...
If we put more carbon in the atmosphere, the NHS is going to have a lot more work to do. If we pollute the atmosphere temperatures soar more in the winter, or sink more in the winter and soar more in the summer, they're going to need more than however much more they need to survive.
It's not an either-or thing. It's
both.
Nobody's saying we should either fund the NHS adequately or we should try and reduce climate change.
Heat pumps or
completely
NHS.
separate.
It's mad. I think he's very much trying to make his point correct rather than analysing it with a balanced kind of opinion. He's just kind of clutching at straws now if he's moving on to the fact that the NHS isn't funded, because that's just completely irrelevant.
Going to cost them over £1 billion a year, and they haven't got £1 billion a year. Oh dear, of course they haven't, because they've blown 11.8 billion of it.
But I get it's YouTube, it's TV, it's sensationalism.
Why are we subsidising your home heating? If it's just to make it...
You can't knock him for his sensationalism. He is very good at it.
I'm not saying you shouldn't have heat pumps. I think heat pumps are a great idea, but you pay for them, not me. Net carbon zero by 2050 is pie in the sky. It will never happen. I won't be around to see whether I'm...
No, but you aim high. Yeah, you probably fall short, but you don't aim for nothing.
right or wrong, but hopefully YouTube has still been going and somebody will dig this video out in years to come and go, oh, do you know what, that guy was talking some sense after all. Because as I said, are we going to go cold turkey on fossil fuels? No. Are we going to reduce them? Yes. Are we ever going to get to a situation where the tractors that are ploughing our fields are run on batteries? Where are the main pollutants for our
Maybe.
Maybe
or hydrogen.
Probably hydrogen, I think, for that
Probably
sort of stuff.
hydrogen.
In the UK, home heating is one of them. Domestic home heating or industrial heating. At the moment, the home heating is the biggest culprit. Industrial heating, and by that I mean commercial heating as well. I'm talking about our schools, our hospitals.
Do you know what the split is?
No, I know that industry is really difficult because most industrial buildings, like factories and old schools and things, are really leaky. Yeah, it's actually very difficult to
it's incredibly
make them,
difficult,
more efficient.
Yeah.
Our offices and all those other places, the logistics of actually going into people's houses and changing their gas boilers over to air source heat pumps with all the inherent problems that got.
Oh yeah, it's too difficult, just don't bother. What's going to be difficult is when the weather gets really bad.
Are far greater than the logistics of changing over our industry and our commercial buildings to heat pumps. Ground source heat pumps, air source heat pumps is actually going to be a lot more realistic as a proposition and will achieve.
Not either or. Again, didn't they do the commercial EPC grading where they have to? You can only rent out. You know more about.
Yeah, it has to be over G or something. I think it may have changed.
They're already working on both. But again, it's not either or. This is too much of a polarized opinion.
Almost as much. If you're in an office and you go home at night, you don't care whether there's a load of heat pumps on the roof that are running 24/7. They're not disturbing anybody. If you think about a school, you go home 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, and that school heating is running all night,
but
producing heat so that when the kids come in the following morning, they're all nice and toasty warm. So we could do that, but the other thing we could do, forget about heating and concentrate on eating. When you look at a carbon footprint for food manufacture, in other words, agriculture, you see filling our bellies.
This has nothing to do with heat pumps.
It's not wrong though.
No,
it's just irrelevant.
But we should be doing this and heat pumps, not this instead of. That's nuts.
Is actually costing the planet dear, and people are getting fatter. Sorry to say this, but it's true.
I can imagine being very angry at fat people too.
So at the moment we've got burning fossil fuels up here, and we're trying to get to here, which is net carbon zero by 2050. So that curve is going to go like that. And at the same time, our food consumption and our agricultural pollution is going to rise and put us back in exactly the same place. So if you want to help the planet lose some weight.
That is just ridiculous. You would do both if you wanted to improve that strange graph. You wouldn't just pick one or the other. Again, it's not either or. The title of this thing is Heat Pump Conspiracy, Who's Telling the Truth? It's not what saves more than heat pumps. It's what can we do? We can do. We want to do everything within our means. Heat pumps is one, where they work or where they can be afforded, and perhaps eating less is another. He's really clutching at straws to try and drive home. I don't know if this guy's got like an agenda. I don't know if he's funded. I don't know if the Skills channel is his channel or if it's funded by someone. But it really seems like they're trying to find anything that they could possibly find just to disprove heat pumps, which I find very, very strange and curious. What's the motive here? Why is he so passionate about this? It's a bit suspicious.
Because at the moment, the amount of land given over to agriculture in this world just to feed us, and don't forget, this is without a growing population. When you bring the world's population increase into this equation, you're going way up from that figure. Just for sake of argument, let's suppose that the world's population stays static. You will find somewhere around 2030, you will see a crossover point where our excess eating exceeds our excess heating. Let's not mention cooling, because a lot of...
If the population goes up, we're going to need new houses. You're not going to put gas boilers in a new house. So
you already can't.
Exactly.
And you don't need to.
And a heat pump would be better there. So it's not either or. It's just clutching at straws.
People are saying, I've got a heat pump, it's a marvellous thing. Not only does it warm my house in the winter, but it also cools my house in the summer. You're bringing that into the equation now. We weren't even talking about cooling houses in the UK. Your heat pump will be running 24/7, 365.
Well, guess what? If we keep on putting gas boilers in, the summers are going to get even warmer, and people are going to be also getting aircon units to cool their house in this. People are already doing it now. Aircon sales are going up every year dramatically in the UK. So that argument is more of an argument to get a heat pump than to not get a heat pump, because everyone's going to need an aircon unit if we keep going up the way we are.
Not just for the winter season. There's another thing you can do. You can start walking a bit more. If it's a question of walking down to the shops or jumping in the car, I prefer to walk. So when people question my green credentials, I have been one of those people that when I've seen somebody sitting there with their engine...
This guy must know about heat pumps. He walks the shops.
running just to keep their aircon going outside the school gates. I've gone and said to them, do you mind switching that off? And I've got some abuse for saying that, I can tell you. I've even had people threaten me in the past.
That's
and I
good.
told some guy who was sitting just across the road from my house for half an hour with his engine running, and I went over and I said to him, "Oi mate, do you mind turning that off?" And he said, "It's not illegal, is it?" And I said, "Listen mate, we're just trying to do our best to stop the pollution. It's lovely."
Although I really hate what he's saying, I kind of like this guy at the same time.
Area, and you're pumping out diesel fumes just so you can keep yourself cool. Are these people going to change their lifestyle? No, they expect the government to do it.
He's entertaining.
They expect the government to actually come up with the goods and say, we want you to lower your carbon footprint. Here's £4,000 in taxpayers' money to help you do it. So what does that actually mean, that phrase, net zero carbon? Well, actually, it's a complete fudge. The idea is everybody knows that we're never going to achieve carbon zero. So that target of net carbon zero by 2050 gives us a get out of jail card, if you like. Basically, what we do is anything that we can't achieve in the way of carbon, we offset, which means that we either use it for carbon capture, which is still technology in the development stage in many cases, or we plant loads and loads of trees to soak up all that carbon, which is a great idea, except that a lot of the time we don't plant them because we can't.
He's just, I mean, this is all true, but or this bit is true, but he's just saying the bad bits about stuff that's going on. It's not really focusing on any positives or It's just having a bit of a moan. So I don't really get where the value is in this.
Carbon offsetting is a problem. So,
but it's nothing to do with heat pumps for sure. It's just part of a different rant. He's saying all the bad bits about what's been done. What about talking about the good stuff? What about new innovations like that hydrogen fuel cell over there, or all the carbon capture technology that's been developed in this country? Actually, aren't we leading? I believe. In that sort of tech, and soon battery tech as well.
I'm not sure what
scale.
final point he's trying to make here. He's saying that carbon capture is not particularly effective and that carbon offsetting has problems. Sure, it does. And he's saying that we probably won't hit a net carbon zero by 2050. Almost certainly not. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. And I don't know if he thinks that we shouldn't try, or if he's saying now we're not going to succeed, so he's the first person to say it on YouTube. I don't think he is the first person to say it on YouTube. Lots of people have their doubts, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't try, and we shouldn't discourage people from trying to lower their carbon emissions and thinking about it from a personal and a business point of view.
Absolutely, and the more we do, the further we kick the can down the road, and as we're further along, we're going to have more intelligent grandchildren with more resources and better education to develop a product or a way out of this situation. It's going to buy us more time, so it's absolutely always worth doing.
Aren't we asked? What we do is we pay poorer nations to plant these trees for us. In a way, it's a bit like indulgences, which obviously the Catholic Church dreamed up. The idea that you can sin as much as you want, so long as you pay the man. So anything we can't achieve by way of carbon reduction, we simply fob off to somebody else. Schemes already exist, they're already up and running. When you go on an aeroplane flight, you can actually volunteer to offset your carbon, paying the money, and somebody will plant some trees for you. Great idea, but how many people actually do it? How many people out of all those bleeding hearts who say, oh, I want to save the planet, actually put their money where their mouth is and sign into that form?
More and more all the time.
So then we've got washing, where they basically just tell you they're doing something, but they're not actually doing it. You've got oil companies who are saying, we're going to become net carbon zero by 2050. How the hell are they going to do that? They produce oil, they produce gas. They give the job to somebody else, somebody gives them a piece of paper, and nobody questions it too closely. But
lots of people question it, and there's huge industries based around carbon and looking at full supply chain, and it's actually very, very difficult. There's regulatory bodies, and it's something that you would have to have a team of people, even for a medium-sized business, to achieve.
Patrick's wife literally works in this field. It pays half of their household income. So
sustainability in big industry and in big business is massive, and it's not something where you just get a piece of paper signed off.
This is from a point of complete ignorance. It's a complete random person's guess at the current situation, not an educated one.
Claiming to help the environment, and are they actually doing it, or are they just using it as a way of selling you their stuff? I believe that heat pumps are one way, but I also believe there is a future in hydrogen.
He believes heat pumps are one way. I just don't understand his message. What's your message?
I think that when people say hydrogen is the fuel of the future and always will be, they're really doing it a disservice, because although there are huge problems with producing hydrogen, one of them is at the moment you have to put electricity into it to do it. If you've got excess electricity, there are many schemes which are now in development where we use wind turbines when that electricity isn't being used and the wind is blowing a hoolie. We turn that excess electricity into hydrogen. We produce hydrogen. You know where hydrogen comes from, H2O. You've got hydrogen in water, and you've got 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. And by the way, oxygen's a great fuel as well. Burns like crazy. So if you can separate those two things out, you've got 2 fuels for the price of 1. So I believe...
Not 2 for the price of 1 though, because it's so intensive to make. It's like 2
moment,
fuels for the price of 10.
And the big problem with producing hydrogen is the countries that are doing it successfully are doing it from very, very cheap or very, very available sources of electricity, which we don't have in the UK at the moment.
We have to address the fact that most of our electricity comes from non-renewable sources. So we've got that massive hurdle to overcome. Then we can start using excess, which is... I don't know if it's ever going to...
It's a long way off.
It's not in our lifetime.
there is a future in hydrogen, and a lot of people said to me, it's all very well knocking heat pumps, mate, but what?
And by the way, me and Patrick in our other business are actually the UK's #1 domestic hydrogen fuel cell installer. So we're not polarised on this issue of heat pumps versus hydrogen or anything like that, or hydrogen boilers. But I mean, hydrogen boilers are years away. There are other products available though. Got a video on this channel actually, which I'll put here.
So we've got nothing against hydrogen fuel cells. We think they're absolutely a very viable product, and especially for places that, for homes that don't have the capability of having an air source heat pump, then a hydrogen fuel cell is a really good interim technology while we're trying to reduce our carbon footprint.
But probably not hydrogen boilers.
What have you come up with as a workable solution? And a lot of people would be laughing at this going, oh, not hydrogen again. But actually, it's there for the taking. And one day, somewhere down the line, we will look back on all this and you know what? It was staring us in the face.
The problem is, if you look at the projected time before catastrophe being predicted by scientists, and overlay that over the likelihood of hydrogen becoming feasible, they're way too close.
And you know what? It was staring us in the face. There it was, all the world's energy requirements, not in oil, not in coal where you've got to dig it up out of the ground, but in water, which is abundant everywhere.
Unfortunately, although that's true and although the resource has always been available, the technology and the understanding and the evolution of humans to be able to utilise it, hasn't been there. So it's not just been the case that we just didn't think of it, we didn't do it. We've literally not been technologically capable of doing it.
And also, it takes a ridiculous amount of electricity to do, much more than it does actually energy it produces. And historically, electricity have very high carbon footprint, so it didn't make any sense.
Seawater into energy, we can do all kinds of wonderful things. We have to do it, we have to apply our mind, not simply because of the pollution, but because we will run out of fossil fuels. So let's get sensible, let's do things which work, let's stop subsidising people to take on propositions, because if they are good...
We are stopping the subsidies. I mean, the subsidies are stopping at the end of March next year, so we've got 7 months or something.
And if we're going to stop subsidising people, should we also stop subsidising the gas boilers through the Eco3 scheme, or subsidising gas, because gas doesn't have any of the pollution levies on it that electricity does, yet a large part of electricity is renewable. So actually, if we're going to stop subsidising something, we're going to probably have to put some gas prices, put the gas prices up.
We also subsidise insulation, double glazing, cavity insulation. All of that is reducing individual people's homes' carbon footprint and cost.
That's a really good point, because we kept on talking about, and one of his main things is that we've got all these old leaky homes that we're going to have to insulate in order to make a heat pump work. Yes, but that also brings down the heat loss. It brings down the overall energy required in that building. Even if you had a gas boiler, that would still be a good idea. Insulating old crap houses is a good thing, not a bad thing. I thought you were going to say something.
Compelling propositions, they should take them on anyway, and let's look at a bit of personal responsibility. Start walking to work, start using your bike, and eat less food. How about that? How many people have I upset now? I'm going to come back and see me soon. I might even have the energy for another rant, if I don't starve.
He is entertaining, although frustrating.
I think he's because he wants to be so sensationalist. He's unfortunately put himself into a bit of a muddy situation. So he's having to give these wild, out there ideas, but at the same time saying heat pumps are okay actually. As long as they're done right and as long as they're not subsidised.
Backtrack, wasn't it? But not too much. Any other last thoughts?
No, I don't think so.
I think we went into quite a lot of detail there. It looks like it's going to be a very long video, so I'll wrap it up. We might do more of these, I think. I quite enjoyed doing that. Stay tuned. Make sure you subscribe and click on notifications. And if you haven't seen the first part of this, we did the first reaction video to his first video, so go back and watch that. I'll drop that around here somewhere. Okay, guys.
See you later.
Next time. Let's see if this...